join in. Hello, everyone. I see you all coming in. A few more just joined us. As you are logging in tonight, your cameras and your microphones are turned off. They've been set to remain off. So if you wouldn't mind keeping them off, that'd be great. That actually really helps cut down on Zoom lag, which I know all of you kids are very familiar with Zoom lag from school. So go ahead and keep those off. It looks like everybody's connecting. Great, yay. I'm Carrie. I'm from the Andersons events team, and I wanted to welcome you guys tonight to our event with Lincoln Peirce and Jeffrey Brown. Thank you all for being here tonight. The Anderson family has been selling books independently since 1875, so we've made it through some really tough times, and we will make it through this tough time as well. But we just wanted to let you know that your support of this event by attending tonight and your purchase of the book through us, it really keeps us on business, and we are just incredibly grateful for your support and for your following us over to this virtual format, because I know it's not quite the same as our usual in-person format. Couple of things about tonight before we get started. As mentioned previously, your cameras and your microphones are off for the duration of the event, so please keep them off. I know how tempting it is to turn them on. If you'd like to ask questions, we will have a Q&A session with the authors at the end. So what you can do is go ahead and submit those questions through the chat feature here on Zoom. And I beg of you guys to submit as many questions as you can think of, because the more questions we get, the better and more interactive the event is, the more fun it is for the authors and then for you guys as well. If you ordered a book for tonight, know that you will receive an email when your book is ready to either be picked up if that's what you chose, or has been shipped and left the Andersons building. It does take us a couple of days because we have real life human beings who actually process all of our book orders. So it could take a day or two, so look out for that email. If you haven't ordered your book for tonight, or you'd like another signed copy, and I want to remind you all that they make amazing gifts, especially for birthday parties, I will be putting info in the chat with a link for where you can order both authors' books from tonight. Okay, but now let's get on to the good part of the evening. We are here tonight, of course, with Lincoln Peirce, who is a New York Times bestselling author and cartoonist. In the past 7 years, 16 million, like wrap your head around that, 16 million of his Big Nate books have been sold. Max and the Midknights has become a best-selling series as well and is beloved by readers of all ages, myself included. When he is not writing or drawing, Lincoln enjoys playing ice hockey, doing crossword puzzles, and hosting a weekly radio show devoted to vintage country music. I love that. He and his family live in Portland, Maine, where he is joining us from tonight. He will be in conversation tonight with the one and only Jeffrey Brown, who is an author-illustrator of the New York Times best-selling Star Wars Jedi Academy series and the Darth Vader series. He is also the author of the Lucy and Andy Neanderthal graphic novels for middle graders and the picture book My Teacher is a Robot, which always makes me laugh out loud for real. Jeffrey resides here in Chicago, yay, with his family. All right, and on that note, boys, I am going to disappear for a little while, but I want to remind the kids, put your questions in the chat. And other than that, have fun. I'll be back later.
Thank you.
All right. So Lincoln, my apologies in advance if this goes roughly, because like I was saying to you earlier, I've never been on this side before, but I tried to prepare, and fortunately it was easy because I've already read Max the Midknights a while ago, and then have the new book, which I'm reading with my 8-year-old, and as you can see, he's still behind, but I went ahead and finished it. Don't tell him. But to start off, why don't you just, for those who aren't as familiar, or maybe have only read your Big Nate books, why don't you tell us about Max and the Midknights?
Well, I had finished the Big Nate novels. I did 8 of those, and I didn't want to start repeating myself. But I still wanted to write books. And so I started thinking about the sort of books that I enjoyed as a kid, the sort of stories. And the one thing I kept coming back to is that I really like stories that combined a lot of action with a lot of comedy. And I always mention like the Uncle Scrooge comic books and the Donald Duck stories, the Batman TV show as examples of action and humor sort of combining. And so I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell an adventure story, a comedic adventure story. And then the next step was deciding what setting I wanted to do that in. And so, I like jungle adventure stories. I like pirate stories. I like mountain climbing stories. But I kept coming back to medieval stories, mostly because of two stories that I really liked as a kid: Robin Hood and The Sword in the Stone. And so I started an idea that did not have Max at the center of it, sort of set it aside, and then when I returned to it a while later, Max was the main character, and the narrative sort of went off in a different direction. And I thought it was just going to be one book, but I enjoyed writing that first one so much that I decided I would make it a trilogy. So I'm working on the third one right now.
That's great. And so how many years would you say that that idea was kicking around the back of your head? Were you when you were finishing up the Big Nate books, were you already reaching a point where you were thinking ahead, or
Yeah. I mean, I always sort of had other story ideas kicking around. And at certain times in the past, I would pitch ideas as TV shows
Mhm.
sometimes, and so there were ideas sort of kind of on the fringes. Um, but it wasn't until I finished the Big Nate books that I felt like I had the time to really, okay, now I can revisit this idea. And I still have a couple ideas in my drawer that I think maybe at some point I'd like to do as books, but we'll see.
Yeah, I know you've done some TV work. Did you have a moment where you felt like this could be a TV show, and then, like, for me, I always come back to books, and I'm wondering if that's the same for you, where creatively there's just something about writing and drawing together in the form of books that feels more right. Did you have that
Yeah, I
experience?
mean, the attempts I made to write for TV, I realized that because I did have a few shorts made by Cartoon Network. They had a
Mhm.
shorts program back then, and so they would essentially solicit ideas from, basically anybody who wanted to pitch, and I got a couple of those made. But I realized that um, they were funnier on the page than they were on the screen. The sort of writing that I'm
Mhm.
probably not going to be able to articulate this very well, but some jokes just land a lot better when you write them or when you're reading them in sort of a comic book format than they do when they're spoken by an actor or a voice actor, or when you see them in motion. And I think that makes sense that TV writing wouldn't necessarily come naturally to me because I had never done it. But it was a really good learning experience for me, just to do a different kind of writing, and it prepared me because at that time when I was pitching these TV ideas, the only writing I had done was the Big Nate comic strip. It started
Mhm.
as a comic strip 30 years ago. So I was accustomed to writing jokes in 4 panels, basically, and and then writing for TV was just a different sort of thing, and it helped me improve as a writer, so that later on, when I had the chance to start writing novels, it seemed less daunting. I felt more
Mhm.
confidence that I could do it.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that it would be a different mindset for TV to books, and even like going from the comic strip to the books. Like like I think um, you probably had a lot of so much experience writing the Big Nate books that when you got to Max and the Midnights, that kind of format was it was easy to get in that mindset. Um, like, whereas I could see when you started the Big Nate books, was there like a kind of a mental shift you had to do every time you're working on the book versus the daily
Yeah,
comic?
I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't. I remember um, talking to my editor, Phoebe, and about basically how to start. And I said, well, why don't I just write a chapter and see how it goes? She said, sounds great. So I sent in a chapter and then realized when she sort of gave me some notes and the art director looked at it that, I didn't know how much stuff to try to fit on one page. As it turned out, I was trying to cram way too much on a page. I wasn't leaving enough space for things to breathe and that sort of thing. And then another major adjustment was, I still do the Big Nate comic strip but I don't write it specifically for kids. I write it for, kids don't read newspapers generally, but there are still plenty of people who read the comics in newspapers, and I write it for them too. But then when I started writing the novels, I was writing something, this is specifically for kids basically age 7 to 12, say. And so that did affect a little bit how I approach the writing. And you sort of set up jokes maybe a little differently, or maybe you would use a joke in the novel that you just wouldn't think to use in the comic strip, and vice versa.
Yeah, no, so you mentioned like you just did that first chapter and sent it to Phoebe and then to see how it went, and now you've got your process down. So can you talk about that process a little? How do you still do one chapter at a time, or how much of the book is planned out? Like, I can especially see like the difference between Max and the Midknights book 1 and book 2. Like book 2, it feels like there's a lot more weaving in and out of like the bigger narrative, and there's, I'm trying to not spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read the book, but like there's things that are setting up things later. So what's your process like for constructing like a longer narrative?
My process is making it up as I go along. So after with the Big Nate novels, what ended up happening was I just sent the chapters in as I completed them. And I remember on the first book, we were probably about halfway through, and Phoebe asked, basically, how's it going to end? And I said, I have no idea. I said, I'll let you know. We'll get there. And I'm just comfortable working that way. And I've spoken to a bunch of other authors who have told me like, oh, I wouldn't feel comfortable working that. But I enjoy it. I think it keeps me sort of like nimble, in terms of the narrative. And so the process, I can give you sort of a visual of the process.
Sure. Yeah.
So I have my little sketchbooks here. And I just write out, and I also doodle, but I write out little ideas in my sketchbooks, little dialogue, and that's where I sort of decide essentially which part of the narrative is going to be text, which part is going to be in a speech bubble, what I'm going to describe in a paragraph versus what I'm going to show in a drawing. And then the next step is I type out the text. So, and then I leave spaces for the rough art. So this is part of the manuscript for book 3, Max and the Midknights book 3, which is going to be called The Tower of Time. And so this is just rough art, but it's fairly finished by my standards because in terms of knowing how everything's going to fit together, I feel like I can't just leave a blank and say, oh, I'll figure out this art later. I have to make sure I know how it's going to fit, because with the text and the pictures working together, it is sort of like a puzzle. And then I have, little notes here, either notes from Phoebe or notes that I've made for myself about things that need to get changed. And then, we sort of work together to nail down all the text stuff. And then when it comes time to start making the finished art, so here's a piece of finished art. This is page 92 of the third Max and the Midknights book. And I draw it at twice the scale that it appears in the book. And the gray tones haven't been added yet, but I still do everything on paper and pen. And that's one reason why the books maybe take a little longer than I would like, or that kids would like, because I still work in an old-fashioned way. So I can't just, if I make a mistake, I can't just use the erase feature and quickly make a change. It's a little more laborious than that, but I like the process that I use. I'm too old at this stage to change my ways.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how long does it take you to finish a book? Like, how long did the first Max book take, and how long did the second one take, do you think?
Well, it was sort of an unusual situation because the first one took quite a long time because we had sort of a family health crisis in the middle of it. And so I ended up not being able to work at the pace that I would normally have been able to. So it really took a couple of years. And then the second one took more like, from the time I started it to finish, probably took more like 15 months. And the third one is going to take about 14 months. Um, uh, Really, it breaks down about evenly. The first half for writing the story and doing the rough art, and the second half for doing all the finished art.
Yeah. Do you so for those who don't know, I actually also work with Phoebe on all the Lucy and Andy books and my new series Space Time, and she's hugely helpful in anticipating and fixing story problems that I don't see in first draft. And um, but I'm always looking back at the book and realizing, oh, that's what I should have done differently, or sometimes there's just like a drawing mistake. So is there anything in the Max books that if you could go back, you would actually go back and change?
Well, I wish I had figured this out earlier. In the first one, this is probably the biggest change that Phoebe has ever sort of suggested for me in any of the books that we've done together. And because I sent her Max and the Midknights, the first book, a chapter at a time, as I have always done. Finished, and I'm thinking, okay, good. We're story is pretty much set in stone. And then she said, well, I'm thinking that, Max and the Midknights, they should get together sooner in the book. And she said it, and right away I realized she's right. She's right. The book is called Max and the Midknights, and they don't really even come together as a group until, I don't know, like halfway through. We got to get them together earlier. And so that took some fairly major sort of tweaks to get to that point, but it made the book a lot better. So that's something that, yes, I certainly wish, looking back, that I had sort of figured that out on my own as I was working. But I think that's one of the risks of working the way I do, is that if you're just going along one chapter at a time, you never have the moment until you're done when you can look at the whole breadth of the story and see, okay, does this work or not? So in that case, there was something that wasn't quite working.
Yeah. But I do think that there is something to you working one chapter at a time that relates to, doing a daily comic strip where you're working in like little segments at a time. And you've probably been at it long enough where you get the sense of building story, so that you're doing things that you just kind of know how to do, so that those are going to happen. But yeah, that's a big change to suddenly rewrite the characters to all meet a lot earlier.
But I think what you just said about, you didn't use the word rhythm, but I thought of the word rhythm when you were talking, because if I try to describe the way I work, a lot of times I'll use that word like I'm sort of a rhythm writer, in that I can't really explain why or how I know that, oh, this clearly should be in a speech bubble versus this clearly should be part of the paragraph. But I just feel like the rhythm works. And when you work on things that are so dialogue heavy, like a comic strip, like I'm really into the whole rhythm of a comic strip, and how it's just got to sound right to your ear. The way the characters speak to one another has to feel like a natural conversation. And I feel like I notice it right away if I try to force a joke. and I'll read it over and I'll think, that's not a conversation that would really happen, because the characters had to speak to each other in sort of an unnatural way to get to the joke. So it's not worth having a joke if you have to work so hard to get there.
Yeah. Well, speaking about conversations that wouldn't happen in real life, I was wondering, so in Max and the Midnights, I know that you aren't that old, but do you draw on your own real life experiences, in ways for writing the characters in the books? Like, are there characters based on real people, and are there situations and things that you've
Well,
have parallels to
for
life?
Max and the Midnights, I think the only real straight line is the name of one of the main characters. Max has an uncle named Budrick, and Budrick was a nickname that we came up with for our son. His name's Elias, and I don't know how we started calling him
That makes
Budrick,
sense.
but we did. So we call him Budrick or Bud. And Budrick, when I started Max and the Midnights, I thought Budrick sounds like that works as a medieval name, like, Roderick, like those sorts of medieval sounding names. So Budrick sounded medieval, but it also sounds funny. So, but otherwise, no, I don't think that there are any real straight shot parallels between like real life people and any of the characters. And I think the longer you're on the planet, the more you see that like most characters that you invent yourself, it's very rare, I think, that they really are based just squarely on one person.
Mhm.
It's usually a case of different experiences filtering in, and you realize, okay, there's a certain amount of my best friend growing up, there's a certain amount of him in this character, but there's all sorts of other stuff too.
Yeah. All right. I got a couple more questions, then we're gonna get to some drawing.
Yeah.
Before I forget, the first question, this is from my son Simon, who is 8, and
There's
I
a
was like,
character named Simon in Max and the Midnight.
he knows.
This is awesome.
he knows. And in fact, if I remember correctly, I think the reaction to him, so we're laying in bed reading at night before going to sleep, we like read a few chapters, and I think his reaction was something like this. But so I asked him if he could ask you one question.
Yeah.
What would it be? And he wants to know, why doesn't anyone go to the bathroom in the book?
I think for the same reason that you don't see that happening on like TV or movies or whatever, because as interesting as it may seem, these sort of like real world problems, you sort of learn to get rid of things that don't have anything to do with the story, like directly. So, but that is an excellent question. Sometimes you sort of lose sight of things that occur to kids, when they're reading your stories, and then you do a school visit or something like this, and a kid asks you a question, and you realize, oh yeah, of course a kid would wonder that.
Yeah. And then before we get to the drawing, I just wanted to ask, so we know now that there's a third Max and the Midnights in the works. Do we have a timetable on when that might be?
I think it's going to come out about a year from now. I'm keeping to the pace that I had set for myself to do the finished art. So the finished art's going to be done sometime in the fall, and then I think it's set for spring 2022. So
great. And then I hear there is a TV project in the works also. Do you want to mention that?
There is a TV project in the works. There's going to be a Big Nate TV show on Nickelodeon starting in September. And it's really exciting just because I've always sort of thought Big Nate would make a good TV show. And but it's been a huge learning experience for me because it's going to be CGI. The characters are all going to be 3D, and so they necessarily look different from the way I draw them. But there's an art director working on the project. His name's Dave Skelly, who is fantastic, and he's building these characters in 3D, and I'm really happy with the way they look. And so I am what they call a creative consultant on the show, which means basically they do stuff and they send it to me, and I sort of make some suggestions, and most of the time they are really responsive to my suggestions, and sometimes they have their own reasons why my suggestions won't work, and so it's been a really good experience so far.
Great. All right. Well, I guess we'll move on to some drawing, because
Let's do some drawing.
Are you gonna draw?
Are you gonna draw? Or are you just gonna make me draw?
Well, for now, I thought I'd just make you draw. But let's start with something easy. I'll just pick a random character, like from the first book. How about Bruce?
Bruce the dragon?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't serious. I was like gonna make you draw the.
No, I'll just draw his head. I can draw Bruce. I can draw Bruce.
No, I want to see a full body, all the scales.
I haven't drawn him in a while, so but yeah, so I just thought the idea of, are you seeing this on my, there we go.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everything's good. I just thought the idea of a dragon named Bruce was funny. Bruce was my uncle's name. So let's see. I haven't drawn him in so long that I can't remember. He has like a couple little like antennae up there, right? And he's got a little like beard thing down here. So yeah, and then he's got. So okay, that's a good way to warm up.
Yeah, you don't have to do all the scales, but for anyone who's wondering, the next half hour would be you finishing that drawing. Well, let's go with someone way easier. Can you just draw Max?
Yeah, I'd love to draw Max. So for those who haven't read the stories, I'll just say that Max is 10 years old. Max lives in the Middle Ages and is an apprentice troubadour. And for a troubadour is sort of like a traveling entertainer. So Max, when we meet Max is traveling around the countryside with Uncle Budrick, and Uncle Budrick is a troubadour. Max is the apprentice, and you learn right away, literally you learn on the first page of book 1 that Max is really not into the whole thing about, being a troubadour, an apprentice troubadour or whatever. Max wants to be a knight, and so that basically kicks off the story. Yeah, drawing at this scale on a big board is a little weird. I do these school visits, and and then I look at the screen and I look at my drawings, and sometimes they just look a little bit warped because I'm sort of drawing off to the side, but this one looks like it's coming out okay.
Definitely.
So there's Max. And Max is a like I said before, I thought it was just going to be a one-off, but I liked the character of Max. I liked the setting, and so I felt like there were more stories I could tell with Max.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I'm glad that there's some new characters. How about one of my favorite characters in the new book, Seymour?
Yeah, Seymour is a little magician, so a little wizard. So I hope nobody minds how sloppy these drawings are. got an eye patch. So I realized, like, I mean, I am no medieval historian, believe me, but it's like it occurred to me while I was writing the first one and sort of inventing the way the characters would look and stuff like that, that, you know, like, I don't think they had reading glasses back then, or if they did, people weren't just like wearing glasses around all the time like I do. So like, okay, I can't have any characters wearing glasses, but I can have a character wearing an eye patch.
All right, so the next one that I was thinking, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but do you think you could draw a bodkin? Can we explain what a bodkin is, or is that too much of a spoiler?
I think we can try to explain what a bodkin is. Well, first of all, you know, I never really knew what a bodkin was. I knew there was this medieval expression like odds bodkins, as if someone would say, like, you know, oh my gosh, or something like that. Then someone told me somewhere along the way that according to Shakespeare, a bodkin is sort of like a dagger, which I didn't know. I don't even know if that's true. Don't quote me on that. But I decided, well, I don't have to, you know, who cares if a bodkin is a dagger? I'm going to make a bodkin what I want a bodkin to be. So a bodkin can look like this sort of ghostly thing on the cover behind Max. A bodkin can look like that, but a bodkin can also look like other things. So I'll do a drawing of what a bodkin can look.
I had a specific idea of who the bodkin should be of.
Okay. Yeah.
Of you.
A bodkin of me? Okay.
You do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Is that too much?
No, I can do that. I can do that. Okay. Little baseball cap.
This is really all I wanted from today. To get you to draw a bodkin of yourself.
Yeah, I don't draw myself very frequently. But okay. And then that's what makes it a bodkin. The eyebrows. The eyebrows make all the difference.
Yeah, just a little bit off.
You think that looks like me?
Yeah. Should do a screen. I hope maybe they're recording this. We could get a screenshot of that later.
Yeah, so sloppy, but you get the idea.
That's great. No, that's it. That makes my day.
Well, what I tell kids when I do the school visits and I'm doing these drawings up on the board is I sort of apologize in advance for how sloppy they are, but I say, when I'm doing the drawings for the books, I sketch them out first in this, non-photo blue pencil, and then I go over them really slowly and carefully, like I'm a slow drawer. And so, we don't have the time for me to draw something that looks finished and sort of polished. So I always tell the kids, like, sorry if these drawings are super sloppy, but that's sort of how I work. So you guys are getting the sloppy versions, but kids don't mind sloppiness, right? Kids don't really mind.
No, I one time I was doing a drawing of BB-8, the Star Wars droid, and I drew the first circle, and then they all started cheering. It's like this. I was that good at drawing BB-8, but all right. So I think we're almost ready to go to questions, unless there's something else you wanted to draw before we do that.
Oh, I'll draw one more character, just because he's really easy to draw. He's quick to draw. Kevin is one of the Midknights, and he's sort of, I can never get through one of these conversations without mentioning my love of peanuts. And Kevin, I feel like, is sort of visually, he's sort of like my tribute to Charlie Brown, because, he's got a big round head like Charlie Brown. got just little dots for eyes like Charlie Brown. Unlike Charlie Brown, though, he looks happy most of the time. Poor Charlie Brown, had his difficulties, um, but yeah, Kevin is fun and easy to draw. So there's Kevin.
Nice.
Okay, let's do some questions
Yeah.
from the
Let's
kids.
see what everyone watching has to ask.
Hey, everybody. We have so many amazing questions. This group
Good.
has been so great with the questions. I love it, love it, love it. Some of them blew my mind. I actually can't wait to hear your answers to some of these. And we have questions for both of you. So let's just try to get through as many of them as we can. Now, I just want to let all the kids know that we might not get through all of them, but we'll try really hard. And I might combine some of your questions together to kind of get through as many as possible. So I'm just letting you guys know. Let's see. First of all, let's start with Ava. She said, how did you get the idea for Max and the Midknights?
Well, I think I was looking to do something that, I knew I still wanted to tell a story that involved kids, because that's sort of like, that's my sweet spot. That's what I've been writing about sort of my whole life. But I wanted it to really be separate from what I've been doing in Big Nate for many years, which, is this school setting and these very sort of, everything about school is really quite organized, and so Nate has these classes, he has his sports, he has his activities, what have you. And I just thought that an adventure story that is also sort of like a road trip story would be really, really fun, where they're not tied down to any one setting or any one neighborhood or any school, where they go from place to place to place. And that was really sort of a driving force behind wanting to write that first book.
All right. How about the Bodkins? How did you come up with the idea for the Bodkins? And that's from Connor.
Well, I was thinking about the whole sort of notion of, one of the themes of the first book is sort of the identity of the characters and the way they think of themselves. So Max is an apprentice troubadour, but that's not the way Max thinks, of the future, and, Kevin is a stable boy, but has no interest in being a stable boy. He thinks of himself as a writer, and he's sort of an intellectual. And so it made me think about the way, like, they think of themselves and the way others versus the way others see them. And so I use that as a jumping off point with the idea of the Bodkins, because the Bodkins are really about sort of they're sort of these shadow identities of all these characters, where, you might look at a Bodkin and think it's the person that Bodkin looks exactly like, and so that whole notion of identity and kind of like having a twin, having an evil twin, I thought was sort of interesting.
It's pretty fun to have an evil twin. Okay, before we go any further, we actually have gotten this question several times today, and that is, does Max have a last name?
No. It's interesting. I think that, again, I preface this by saying I'm not a medieval scholar, but I think that sometimes back then, maybe people sort of got their names based on their occupation or something like that. And so I remember thinking that when I was writing the first book, I did some research and learned that sort of a person who took care of horses was called an ostler, O-S-T-L-E-R. So I thought about that becoming Kevin's last name, but then that just started to get really complicated. I thought, I don't really need last names in this story. And a lot of times, like we were talking about earlier, if something is not really essential to the plot, you just sort of get rid of it. And I thought, I don't really need last names for the story to continue. So none of the characters have last names.
Ooh, you heard it here first. I love this question. Max goes to night school. Why doesn't she have homework? Oh, and this is from I Love Max and the Midknights plus 15 red hearts afterwards. That's the username.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Well, there is a line in book 3 where Max is explaining a little bit to another character what school is like, and Max sort of explains what homework is. So I think that just because we don't see Max doing homework doesn't necessarily mean that Max doesn't have homework.
Okay. Is it okay for us to talk about Max's sister? Or is
Yeah,
it
sure. Yeah.
spoilery? Okay, I wasn't sure. So we've got 2 questions about her from Ava and from I Love Max and the Midknights. Will Max and her sister Mary get to meet up again, and will her sister become a Midknight?
The answer to the first question is yes. And the answer to the second question is if becoming a Midknight means having an adventure with all the other kids who are in this story, then yes.
Ooh. Do you, Lincoln, have a favorite Midknight? And that's from Ryan.
I don't have a favorite Midknight, but I will say that the most enjoyable Midknight to write for is Kevin, because Kevin uses, he is very well read and is very imaginative and has a vocabulary that is far beyond what any of his peers have, and so that makes him more fun to write for. And as I showed you before, he's super easy to draw. So I don't know if that makes him my favorite, but he's a lot of fun.
He is my favorite, for what it's worth. Will we ever meet Max's Bodkin? That's from Ava.
I will answer that by saying that what makes you think that Max has a bodkin?
Ooh, deep thoughts. Yes, there was some chatter about that in the chat, some theories. I loved it. And then I Love Max and the Midnight asked, does Max have a boyfriend?
Well, I think you learn, you definitely learn in the book I'm working on now, book 3, that Max is a little bit sweet on Sedgwick, this boy that she knows from night school. So, but beyond that, that is all I will say. I'll respect Max's and Sedgwick's privacy.
Okay, so you have mentioned that you are in the middle of book 3 right now. You're making book 3. Will there be more books? Do you know how many books there will be?
Well, I'm planning on it just to be 3.
Oh.
I am very happy with the way that the story arc ends at the end of book 3. So you never say never, but I would say for right now, that's my plan, for it to be a smaller, a more modest sized series than the Big Nate series, for example, that was eight books long.
Ooh, quite the scoop. A little bit of a stab to the gut for some of our big fans, though, I think. Okay, now I've got a question for Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I loved this question. This is from Alex. He said, did Star Wars let you write the Jedi Academy of books? I love the Jedi Academy books and Big Nate and Max the Midknights, just so you guys know. He loves both of you.
Yeah, so I knew when I first started doing Star Wars books, the first book I did was Darth Vader and Son, and I knew that I wanted it to be actual Star Wars and not have to make it a parody. So that required getting Lucasfilm on board. And so fortunately, Chronicle Books was the publisher of the Darth Vader and Son books. And they had done a lot of books with Star Wars and Lucasfilm before. And so they kind of went to Lucasfilm and said, hey, we have this cartoonist who has this idea. And what do you think? And so Chronicle actually worked out the deal with Lucasfilm, so that's all official. And then what happened was, while I was working on Darth Vader and Son, Scholastic had gone to Lucasfilm and said, we want to do a middle grade illustrated Star Wars novel, where it's like middle school, but set in the Star Wars universe. And my editor, J.W. Rinsler, on the Darth Vader and Son book said to them, you should talk to Jeffrey Brown because he's working on this other book. Maybe he would be interested. And so that's how I got onto the Jedi Academy series. So yeah, so it's all official Lucasfilm Star Wars.
Very cool. We are going to move into some Big Nate questions. We had a lot of Big Nate questions, and some of them I have as well. So I love I'm not alone in this. First of all, and there was some discussion about this in the chat, does Nate have a last name?
Nate has a last name. It's Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. He does not have a middle name. That comes up sometimes in some of the jokes, but yeah, that's his last name.
Okay, and then I saw this one come through a few times, and it is the same question that I've had when I read these books with my children. Why does Nate never get a dog for Christmas?
Well, that's one of the things that sort of parallels the experience I had as a boy. So I was begging my parents for a dog from when I was old enough to beg. And I did eventually break them down, and we got a dog when I was in 7th grade. But you know, there is an old adage in comics that, you know, it can be a huge mistake to sort of give characters, or readers for that matter, exactly what they want, because it's funnier if there's sort of this ongoing tension. And the most famous story around that is the old comic strip Lil Abner, which was done by a cartoonist named Al Cap. And in Lil Abner, this character named Daisy May was in love with Lil Abner and was chasing him for literally years and years, trying to get Lil Abner to marry her. And finally, Al Cap, in about 1952, decided, okay, I'll let him get married. And he realized almost immediately, I have made a huge mistake. But it was too late. They were married. And so I think it's funnier for Nate to desperately want a dog, but not to be able to get one of his own. And so he has to sort of content himself to take care of, to dog sit for Spitzy, this really dysfunctional dog who lives next door. And so I don't know if, I'm not saying Nate will never get a dog, but I'm saying that for now it's still working for him not to have one.
Okay. This one's from Ava. Speaking of Spitzy, how did you come up with the name Spitzy and Pickles? Why do Spitzy and Pickles like each other? And then Kyler asked, why does Spitzy always wear a cone?
So Spitzy always wears a cone because Spitzy is based on a dog that I knew growing up who always wore a cone. And so I just made a cartoon version of that same dog and made Spitzy just look a little more comical. I named him Spitzy just because I wanted to come up with a name that sounded sort of dopey and clumsy, and yet still sort of sounded kind of like a dog's name, like Snoopy or Sparky. But Spitzy sounds like more kind of, you know, uncoordinated somehow than those sort of classic dog names. And Spitzy and Pickles like one another because it runs counter to what Nate feels like a real dog should be. You know, Nate has these ideas about, you know, a dog being sort of the classic sort of, you know, Henry Huggins and Ribsy sort of thing where, you know, let's play fetch, let's do this, let's do that. And Spitzy never wants to do any of those things or is inept at doing them. And so in Nate's mind, dogs hate cats. That's just your classic dog will chase a cat, scare a cat away or whatever. But in fact, Spitzy falls in love with Pickles and they have sort of a romance. And Nate is just sort of appalled, like this is not the way a real dog is supposed to act.
I love that. It's probably my favorite part, actually. Okay. Kyler asks, where is Nate's mom?
Oh, Kyler. So you are hitting on, you know, I just talked about Al Cap's big mistake with with Lil Abner. My big mistake was when I started Big Nate as a comic strip. I thought Big Nate was going to be a strip more about Nate and his family. And so Nate's dad and Nate's sister were two really big characters. But I wanted Big Nate to be set apart from other popular comic strips of the day, like For Better or For Worse, or Calvin and Hobbes, or Foxtrot, where there were two parents and kids. So I said, I'll do a single parent family, and I'll have the dad be the primary parent, and that'll be sort of unique. So I'll make reference to the fact that Nate's parents are divorced, and I'll bring the mom in eventually as a character, but Nate lives with his dad. And then in pretty short order, I realized that I didn't have much interest in doing a strip just about Nate's family, and that all the funny gags were happening in Nate's school. And the jokes and the stories that I really liked to make were about Nate's teachers and his classmates. So his family life sort of receded into the background. And all of a sudden, like 2 years had gone by, and I realized it would really be weird if I brought in the mom now after all this time. I haven't even mentioned her since the very early days of the strip. So I just sort of pretended like the whole thing never happened. And so I haven't made reference to Nate having a mom for years and years in the strip, but that's why Nate's mom never shows up. I think there might be some plans. Nickelodeon may have some plans to actually introduce Nate's mom as a character. So that would be completely like revolutionary. So we'll see.
Okay. We have had a few questions also, let's see, from Alex, and I think Ava threw one in there too, about Mrs. Godfrey and why she and Nate dislike each other so much.
Well, I think that has more to do with Nate's sort of lack of imagination as far as he sees sort of the women in his life, because Nate is not very mature. And so I think in the early days of the comic strip, and for quite a while, he basically saw the women in his life either as these sort of tormentors like Mrs. Godfrey or his sister or Gina, his arch rival, or they were objects of a crush for him, like Jenny, this girl that he had a crush on for years and years. And there wasn't really much in the middle. And so in the case of Mrs. Godfrey, I just think Nate's mindset from the start was, I don't like her, and she's very demanding. And I'm not saying Mrs. Godfrey is a good teacher. I think I make it clear that she sort of plays favorites, and she, I think, many times unfairly sort of over focuses on Nate. But I think I also have gone to sort of lengths to make it plain that she's not a monster either. She's not a horrible teacher, but Nate sees her as such. And one of the things that I did in one of the Big Nate novels is I tried to make Mrs. Godfrey seem sort of more open to the way Nate tries to do things. In the second book, Nate does this project and about Ben Franklin, and he submits it in the form of basically comics. And Mrs. Godfrey actually thinks they're great. She likes the comics. So that was sort of a, one case among many others in which, maybe Nate sees that Mrs. Godfrey is not as awful as he thinks.
Okay, we have a few more Big Nate questions, but I'm actually going to ask one last one, and then we'll come back to them if we have time after some of the other questions we got in. So I just want to let everyone know. This is from Elliot and Phoebe, who it looks like they're joining us all the way from Santa Cruz, California. That's amazing. And they said, in the title of Big Nate, why does it say big?
Well, because the character is named after a nickname I gave my brother when we were children. So I have an older brother, his name's Jonathan. And when I was maybe 9 or 10, I suddenly realized that if you took the first 2 letters off of the name Jonathan, you were left with the name Nathan. So I said to him one day, I'm going to start calling you Nathan. And he said, what are you talking about? No, you're not. I said, yes, I am. And then I shortened it to Nate, like literally in a day. And then I started calling him Big Nate because he's a big person. He's still a big person. He's like 6'5", and so it became one of those family nicknames where his name's Jonathan, and everyone in the world calls him Jonathan or John, but I call him Nate. And he's Big Nate. But the character Big Nate is nothing like my brother personality-wise. It's just that I love my brother. I love the name, and I wanted to use it as the title of the strip, so I did.
Awesome. All right, these next couple questions are for both of you. First of all, this is from Jennifer. It sounds like she is an artist. She says, "What sketchbooks do you use, and how do you guys keep your sketchbooks?"
Go ahead, Jeff.
I use for rough drafts, so I just use the standard moleskin, and I like to use, for the first draft, I use with the squares, so it kind of gives me guidelines, and I just keep them in stacks wherever. And then for final artwork, I draw on just a Bristol board, so just Strathmore Bristol.
Same here. I use a smaller size moleskin, that's all. But I also use Bristol board, and I use my Staedtler pigment liners. Those are my pens, and I put colored rubber bands around them so I can discern which one is which thickness, because they come in different thicknesses. So, but yeah, I draw in an old school way. It sounds like Jeff does too.
Yeah.
I love that look at behind the scenes there. Okay, this is from Ava. What is your favorite book that you have both made? It's like picking a favorite child. I know.
I don't know that I could pick one. I mean, one of the things I've done is I've tried to do different books over the years. So, the picture book, My Teacher is a Robot, was really fun to do, but an entirely different kind of book than I guess the first Lucy and Andy Neanderthal maybe as maybe or the first Jedi Academy. Like the first book in a series is always really new and exciting because it's like doing something I haven't done before. But I like them all for different reasons, so it's hard to, I don't know that I could pick just one.
Lincoln?
Well, I like this book I'm working on right now, the third Max and the Midknights book. I don't know that I would make it my favorite over the other Max books, but because I'm working on it now, I think it's just at the forefront of my mind. I really like it. It's my clear favorite among my Big Nate novels is the fourth one. It's called Big Nate Goes for Broke. And the two reasons for that are that it's the only one of the books that takes place during the winter. And so it gave me the chance to make different sorts of drawings, drawings of sledding and snowball fights and snow sculpture contest at the end and all that. And in that book, I introduced a character who has since become a really big part of Big Nate's world named Dee Dee. And so when I was talking earlier about the way Nate looked at sort of the women and girls in his life, Dee Dee was my attempt to introduce a character who wasn't a crush and wasn't someone that he didn't like, but was someone who over the course of the book proves herself to be like a true blue friend. And so and I like Dee Dee so much that I introduced her into the comic strip, and she's going to be a big part of the TV show. And so so that would be my favorite among the Big Nate novels.
All right. This is going to be our last question of the night because we've gone just a hair over time, not too bad. And that is, I think everyone wants to know this one actually, especially after hearing you guys talk and compare notes. And this is from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Ginam. And they asked, will you guys ever do a collab?
Well, You know, I saw the look of horror on Jeffrey's face when I described like the way I work, sending in one chapter at a time. So I'm not sure that would work for him. Uh, but I've never collaborated with another author or cartoonist before, but I love Jeff's work, and so who knows? You never say never.
Never say never. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in a way, I feel like as a cartoonist, I collaborate with anyone whose books I read. So there's like an influence that comes in, you know, and even if it's not readily apparent, I feel like there is a collaboration there. Like I feel like I learned from reading Lincoln's books. So
that's a really great answer. I love that.
Kind of a meta
and vice versa for sure.
All right, guys, I think that's going to do it for us. I did want to leave you with one statement that made me laugh. It's not a question, but it's just something someone put in the comment and it made me giggle. This is from Evan, and he said that he just wanted you to know I wrote my Neanderthal report for school for social studies using only facts that he got from Lucy and Andy. And I just really love that. So I wanted to share it.
It was very informative.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Why not learn while you're having fun, right? So on that note, I am going to say thank you again to everybody for coming, of course, supporting Andersons. And thank you so much to both of you, Lincoln and Jeffrey, for being here tonight and continuing to show up for Andersons. I know you are both been with us many, many times, and we greatly appreciate your support. And other than that, I just want to say, hey, everybody, we're almost there. Stay safe out there, and good night.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.